So I think want to talk today about the cloud. Has it really lived up to the hype? And when we look at the idea of the hype of the cloud, as soon as I move it back down again, when I want to look at the cloud itself, I'm really concerned with where's the cloud, where's the hype in the cloud itself. Some of the things I want to talk about today in those areas. I also want to talk about a little bit about the provenance of cloud computing. Where did it really come from? Many times in our industry, we get so wrapped up in technology and buzzwords that we forget that a lot of this has been done before in other modes and mediums, and that we can learn. If we learn a little bit from the history of what happened previously, we can get some better use of technology we have today. Talk a bit about who the players are in cloud computing today and what's happening with those players. Also look back several years and see where they were at that time and how have they changed or improved or gained more market share today. Talk a little bit about why do you want to be in the cloud? What's your reason for cloud computing? And again, here's some areas to get some questions in about why would you want to go into cloud computing? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to your organization? And then also, what's really important now within the cloud? What is important for what I want to do within cloud computing? Well, this slide is titled SOA what? Well, SOA is service-oriented architectures. That was the great buzzword in the middle 2000s. And actually the first time we looked at service-oriented architecture within Athens Group was when we first started in 1999. There have been lots of pushes within some of the larger companies, especially here in Austin, to look at software as a service. What kind of architecture do you want in place? So there were a number of myths around service-oriented architecture. First, it had a huge return on investment. Well, as anyone who's been in the business long enough, you can pretty much show any type of technology will have a very large ROI. It just depends on what are the assumptions you're going to make. SOA, service-oriented architecture, only had a huge ROI if you could very quickly use software you didn't have to buy. Software piracy has a very large ROI also, but it's not something you want to do, and you still needed pretty good infrastructure to use that, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s. Myth number two is that service-oriented architecture is about new technology. Well, service-oriented architecture, or where the cloud may be today, is not just about new technology, it's about using existing technology. The only new technology that SOA really used was better bandwidth, faster web-based architectures, faster processors that you had on your desktop or on your servers. SOA has been replaced by cloud computing. That's myth number three, and I don't think so. SOA itself if anything, it's just been rebranded to what we now call today SaaS, or software as a service. It's a part of cloud computing, and I'll talk some more about that. The other myth is that SOA is dead. Well, if you think SOA is dead, you haven't been looking at what IBM's been doing. IBM every year publishes a new set of red books, which is their prime set of documentation on all of their applications, and service-oriented architecture is still a very, very large part of what they do. This blue line down here, the blue line starting somewhere in the middle of 2004 and extending through today, is what you get when you look at the prevalence of searches for service-oriented architecture on Google. one of the ways to test the hype factor of new technologies is to do searches within Google that will then look at how do you what's the prevalence of that search term. Very valuable way to go looking at Google. The red line, this red line is cloud computing. So if you just looked at this and said, oh yeah, service-oriented architecture may not be dead, but it's definitely flatlined, and cloud computing is really where it's at, you could be misreading what that really means within how we view technology. So what did SOA promise? Service-oriented architecture, again, this old concept, 10, 15 years old, SOA is there for building business applications. That's what it really promised. Well, it promised that I can build business applications and I don't have to go out and buy all of this development infrastructure. So some of the original service-oriented architecture companies are today known as OpenAir, Salesforce.com. Now, they started out with having the ability to put together not only just the data that you needed to manage sales operations. OpenAir was not just the one to be able to submit timesheets and expense reports, but also to do HR management, to do customer resource management, start looking at what these could do, and these came out of the idea of using service-oriented architecture for building business applications. I'll talk some more about Salesforce as we go through this, and Salesforce is a good example of that, where the Salesforce development engine itself is a very powerful engine for building applications. It came out of this first point of a service-oriented architecture. SOA, black box component architecture. Yes and no. There are some aspects of service-oriented architecture that you can treat completely as a black box. You have an input, you look at the documentation, you do some experimentation, you get an output. You don't care how things happen in the middle. That only worked so well or so long as you didn't have regulations that required you to understand what was going on in that black box. If you're in the medical industry and you have to comply with the Food and Drug Administration, you have to comply with HIPAA, those types of privacy and information protective regulations, you can't have a black box. You can't just assume that that vendor is going to have looked out for your best interests and everything's going to be fine. And in fact, I don't think the organizations that monitor it and check it will accept that as an argument either. Service-oriented architecture, SOA components are loosely coupled. Well, the idea of having a loosely coupled set of components means that I can use one piece or two pieces of this 10-piece puzzle or 10-piece toolbox. Being loosely coupled assumes that I'm going to have these very straightforward, easy-to-use individual tools. Well, that may be so if you can buy all those tools from one vendor. But if you have filled your toolbox with tools from Harbor Freight and Sears and Roebuck and other